So welcome to the third in the series of the Smart Split. Today we are discussing co-parenting. Not always easy, but very much necessary if you've got children and are separating. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Nicole Farrow, a relationship and family coach who specialises in co-parenting and blended families. And I'm joined by my co-host, Samantha Woodham, who is a barrister with 18 years experience and also the co-founder of the Divorce Surgery. So together we're going to discuss this very, very hot topic and answer any questions that people have. And if you've got the playback, then obviously questions have already been submitted, but you can always ask one for the next time round. So to kick us off, Sam, can you just answer the first one, which is, do you have to go to court to arrange your child arrangements?
So that's a really important question. I'm really glad you asked it. So many people are really confused about this and also don't know how judges feel about this. So the most important thing to know is no, you absolutely don't have to go to court to sort out your child arrangements. Judges don't think parents should be in court to sort out their child arrangements unless they need to be. And we'll talk in a minute about what that means. But to kind of give you some context, in about 2019, there was a report done by the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, which is a big charitable foundation which analyses the impact of justice on people. And they found that of all the couples that were separating in the UK, 38% of them, so over a third, ended up in court over the arrangements for their children. Now, the figure is a bit in doubt in terms of the stats, but it was the judges were so horrified by that statistic that the president of the family division, who's the most senior judge in England and Wales, ordered an urgent review into what was going on. So, what was going wrong that so many people ended up in court about their children? So that's kind of the context in terms of how judges are looking at it. And they're desperately trying to change perceptions so that people understand they don't have to go to court, but also so that if they do end up in court, judges are looking at this from the basis of let's find a solution for this family rather than looking at it as some kind of justice or entitlements. It's actually what's going to work for this child and this family and how do we get this family out of here as quickly as possible? Because again, all the research shows that actually court proceedings, because they're adversarial and people are arguing different cases, different sides, they're very, very stressful for the people going through it. And obviously, if you've got stressed parents, that has a massive impact on the children. So the biggest takeaway I can give at the start is court is the last resort. If your safety is at risk, it is absolutely the place you need to be. And there are some urgent measures that judges can do to protect you and protect your children. But if it's not about safety, if it's just about we've each got different views about how our children should be brought up and how we should divide up their time, that is 100% normal. It is absolutely like I'm sure Nicole will say this in a minute, but it's actually super rare to find a situation where a couple are unraveling their kind of intimate adult relationship and they instinctively feel the same about how their children's arrangements should be. Generally, they feel quite different. And my experience is that it starts from a place of fear because you'll have each parent, as you when you're in a relationship, you have set roles that you develop, and you develop those because they work, because not everyone can do everything. You have to be efficient. So some people get better at some bits than others. And then suddenly you're changing the relationship, you're moving into two households, and there's a panic. There's a panic by the parent who, say, had done predominantly most of the care, that they're sort of going to be marginalized and that, the other parent won't be able to do it as well. And then there's a panic by the parent who maybe hasn't been as hands-on that, sugar, I wasn't that hands-on. What's going to happen now? Am I going to stop being a parent? And so addressing that first of all, rather than kind of thinking, you say 3 nights a week, I say 5 nights a week, it's thinking about, okay, can we just get some broad parameters here of our aims? And generally, people can always agree on we want our children to get through this without it being a massive drama for them. We want them still to feel that when they're with each of us, they're at home. We want them to have really positive relationships and to see that this ending of the marriage is not ending their family. It's still a family, it's just different. And sometimes people are also thinking, and this is amazing if you can get yourselves into this space, but thinking, I'm kind of modeling here because one day my child might go through this and have a relationship which ends, and then they're going to move on to another relationship, and I want to show them that we can do this decently. Now, if you can start on all of that, you realize that the rest of it is logistics. It's working through a parenting plan. It's thinking about, who can do pickups on certain days, who is more into various activities than the other one. There's going to be give and take. There's going to be changes to arrangements, because if you end up in a court scenario, the research shows that if you get to a final hearing and an outcome is imposed on you by a judge, about a third of those cases end up coming back to court within 2 years. And the reason they do is because if something's imposed on you by a stranger who's never met your children, really hard to accept they've got it right. And you're going to have that residual feeling of they just didn't get it, and there's a burning injustice and I need to change it. Whereas if you start out with arrangements and think, what, this definitely isn't forever. But we're going to work through something. We're going to try different things out. We're going to be flexible with each other. But above all, we're going to accept that we're promoting each other. That's the best place to start. And that's a really important thing to know, is that court isn't the place to start.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was brilliant. Very, I couldn't have said it better myself in terms of, trying to approach it in the right way and the difference that can make. But in terms of, you mentioned about going backwards and forwards in terms of 3 nights, 5 nights, etc. But I think there's now an assumption that, and we've actually had a question for this, is it always just 50-50 now? It's always that you're both, it's joint custody and it's 50-50, like that's where you start. And that's, where it would start with a court. So that's kind of where you're trying to back off from if you're one or the other. What's your...
Yeah, so no. So there's no presumption of 50-50 shared care. So the way that English law works is that we have statutes, which are kind of laws laid by Parliament. And then we have case law, which is individual cases that go in front of judges. And when you get important cases, the judges publish those judgments. And so you look at both to work out where the law's going. But if we look at the statute, it's the Children Act. And the paramount consideration in the Children Act is the welfare principle. It is section 1.1 of the Children Act. And that says that, so in every decision a judge makes, that judge has to consider, is this in the child's best interest? And that's the most important factor. And they have to justify how it's in the child's best interest. So they have to go through something called the welfare checklist to go through and explain why this decision is in the best interest of a child. Now, there is nothing in the statute or in case law saying there's a presumption of 50-50 shared care. There is a presumption of parental involvement. So provided that it's safe, there's a presumption that it's in a child's best interest for each of their parents to be involved in their lives. But that does not mean a 50-50 shared care. So in terms of how the courts will approach it, obviously by the time it gets before a judge, you are going to have 2 parents saying 2 different things about what they think is fair. But a court will explore that from the perspective of the child, try and understand what the child's wishes and feelings are, try to understand, what logistics work for the child. Also look at the parenting dynamic. Is there a power imbalance here? Is there a concern that one parent's trying to marginalize the other? But from the perspectives of hopefully most people listening to this who aren't in court yet, the most important thing to know is, well, okay, a judge isn't going to impose a presumptive answer on us. A court is going to want us to create a bespoke solution for our child. So let's think about what that bespoke solution might look like. And the best way to do that is to start on practicalities. have an overriding objective, which is we are going to be involved parents. We both love our children. We are going to promote each other. We're going to have each other's photos in each other's homes. This is going to be a joint effort. But now we just need to figure out logistics. And so often, quality is better than quantity. And in my experience in litigation, the parents who are striving for that perfect 50%, it's not really about 50%. It's about feeling like they're still valued, they're still an active, participating parent. And the only way that they can define that is by a percentage, because they're not being given that reinforcement by the other parent. And ultimately, if you go to court, and I'll say this to people, if you're falling out about child arrangements and you end up with an order, it's a piece of paper. Yes, you can enforce it, you can go back to court forever, you can spend the whole of your children's childhoods litigating in court, but so much better to find a solution that you can both live with and promote with your children, and they'll then follow, because they pick up on all of the stresses that we think we hide from them. It's so hard to shelter them from. And so the more that you can both think, maybe this isn't perfect, maybe this isn't exactly what I want, but we're going to give it a go and we're going to see how it goes, and we're going to be flexible if it doesn't work, the more you're likely to find a solution which lasts. I'm just seeing, I've got a question in the chat from Tanya, whether we'll change if the children are outside of the UK, New Zealand, for example. So it depends. I mean, the court's jurisdiction is established on the basis of the habitual residence of the children. So this is a question, if you're in New Zealand at the moment and the children are in New Zealand, I would certainly, as a first port of call, explore it with a local lawyer. I don't know if there's plans to return. We are actually doing a webinar next month about moving outside of the UK and the impact that has, so that might be useful. But for this webinar at the moment, I'm just going to focus on English law because that's the only law I know. But yes, I think it definitely would be worth touching base with a New Zealand lawyer. But I mean, Nicole, I feel like I've been monologuing now. In terms of from your perspective, because so much of this, I guess, the key point is about the relationship between the parents, and very little, in fact, is about the law. Sometimes legal advice can really help in resolving issues, but judges will quite often say, us making an order isn't going to fix this. What's going to fix this is the parents' relationship dynamic. And on that note, if I pass over to you, Nicole, if you've got someone listening who's struggling to co-parent, who feels their co-parent's being very difficult, what are the best strategies for them?
Yeah, so I think to your point that you made earlier, Sam, is thinking about what the emotion is behind it, because quite often, bad behaviour comes from a place of fear, and the fear of losing their children is every parent's worst nightmare. And when it comes to child arrangements in particular, it's a really painful topic, because if you are stepping out of the family home, or you are having to sort of not have your children at home as much as you once did, that's a really hard thing for as a parent to get your head around. So I think I would always try and encourage people to try and understand the behaviour, and understand what the underlying fear is. And usually it is a fear of loss of the children, or the relationship with the children. So if you can try and kind of come at it from that perspective of trying to see the other person's perspective, not only your own, and meet in the middle, then that's the best place to start. But if you're and in doing that, try and offer them some reassurance that you're not trying to take the children away. Also, please bear in mind that your children's arrangements will need to change throughout your co-parenting relationship, because as your children change, so do their needs, and they're wanting to go to mum or dad's at a weekend when they want to be out with their mates when they're teenagers is not likely to happen. It's not the result of an issue between parents and child. I think quite often similarly, we can get really hung up on our parenting styles being very different and get quite wedded to our own parenting styles when we are separating or co-parenting, when actually we would have had the same disagreements, and if we'd stayed together, that wouldn't have changed. You've both come from different upbringings yourself. You've both got a different way of parenting, and you both bring different values and attributes to the table. And actually, if you were both exactly the same, your child would be less well for it. You have to both appreciate what each other brings to the table, and the fact that neither of you are going anywhere. You are a family for life. Although you may have ended your romantic relationship, you are still going to be in each other's lives for life. And I'm sorry to break that to you. It's not till the kids leave home. There will be occasions when your children grow up, whether it's graduations or weddings or Christmases when there's grandkids around, that you'll both want to be at, and you want to both enjoy, and you want your children to enjoy. You don't want them to be put in the position of having to have two events because mum and dad can't get together and be in the same room. And you set that precedence from the very beginning. And you need to try and think long term about the fact that you will still be a family. There will be differences in your parenting style. There will be things that you guys come up against as parents, especially through the separation, and then later down the line, teenage years or whatever it is. And actually having your co-parent have your back in those situations is really helpful, because kids will manipulate. We all did it. I did it. My parents were divorced when I was 2, and as a teen I definitely tried to play mum and dad up against one another. That's part of growing up, and knowing that your co-parent has your back and you have theirs, and providing that united front is going to, one, give a much better and more nurturing environment for your children to grow up in, but it's also going to support the both of you as parents, because being a parent is a really tough job anyway. So trying to keep back to, we're both in this for the long run, we're not going anywhere, we're probably both at a point of fear of some description, and actually trying to realize that and come together. And in doing so, one of the best places to start is a co-parenting plan. And if you, no matter what your relationship is with your co-parent, and even if you're trying to be really amicable and get on with them and they're just refusing, realize it might not be like that forever. They will eventually move on and emotions will change. It might be really hard now, but time and distance, and maybe once the divorce is settled or the finances settled or whatever other sort of strains you have going on at the moment have been removed, you can get to that co-parenting relationship that you want. Don't kind of write it off as it will never happen. But if it's really, really a struggle at the moment, then stick to, and none of that's working, stick to a really good co-parenting plan, where you actually think about parenting styles and values and what you can agree on. And it's not just about the logistics, but it's how you want to raise your children together, and realize that that is a living document that will evolve over your children's childhood and how their needs change. And if you really can't get to that kind of more amicable stage at the moment, think about treating them like a work colleague that you're not really keen on. We've all had them. You have to be polite. You have to show up. You don't get to tell them what you think of them at the water cooler each morning. You stick a smile on and you sit and you come to the table and you do your job. And your job is to be a effective co-parents and to raise happy children and to protect them as much as possible from the difficulty that you're having with your ex and your co-parent. So that's your job, and you show up in that way until you can get to the point where maybe some of that pain or some of that fear can dissipate and you can kind of gradually rebuild it. It will pass, but I think in most cases, separation, you have to remember that you're both going through it, but usually at different speeds. So it may be that you're at a point where you're happy to co-parent and are feeling a little bit more, at ease with the situation, and your other co-parent isn't. It doesn't mean they won't catch up. They may just not be in that place at the moment. So if you need to, just treat them as a very professional relationship until you can hopefully build on that. And as part of that would be having really good boundaries as well, which also you can put in your parenting plan, because I think the thing that you forget is you've had a massive shift in terms of your relationship, and you're no longer emotionally attached to one another in the same way you once were, and you need to fill a different role in each other's lives, and that needs to be an ongoing role, and you kind of both need to adjust to those kind of new terms of engagement, if you like, of how that's going to work, and that's your family dynamic. And if you're really struggling with that, then there are professionals who can help you to support you through that. But you know, that's what you're both trying to adjust to, isn't it? Is that new family dynamic of, you know, how we're going to work this together going forward, because we're not what we were to once together, what we once were. We're something different now, and we need to allow ourselves to move into those roles and make space in the family for that, for those roles, and how that will change as we go forwards.
I can see, Nicole, that we've got a question about nesting. So staying, you know, where one parent's in the family home and then the other parent will come back in to the family home for periods of time. But, you know, what happens if then when you're there in your time with the children, the other parent comes back? And I think, you know, nesting generally is increasingly popular, sometimes as an interim solution. So when, you know, separation first happens and you think, oh, we don't want to disrupt the children too much, so we'll move in and out, sometimes because of geography. But I think it's really important to have really clear boundaries between the adults about how that nesting is going to work, because and again, this, you know, you're going to have stuff to say about this, Nicole, but, you know, from a legal perspective, judges used to hate nesting. Because they said, you know, it's not clear and final, and it creates complications from a financial perspective. But also, is it confusing for children? I think increasingly now judges are realizing that, you know what, whatever works for a family works. And we shouldn't be standing in the way of that, provided they've had legal advice and they understand the implications. What I'd say from a practical perspective in terms of nesting is there are financial implications from a legal perspective, but we'll leave those aside for now. Just looking at the co-parenting ones, you need really clear boundaries about who's going to be there when, and that one of you isn't just going to pop back because you're separated, you're moving to separate lives. Actually, this is an opportunity for each of you to do your own thing, to be your own style of parent with the children, and to discover that, because actually that is a discovery when you separate. It's like, oh, I could be a kind of different kind of mum now. This is interesting. And also, it's really confusing, I think, for you and for the children if the other co parent is then coming back in. And then what? The dynamic is weird, because are you living as a family again? How is that for you? I'm not judging. So if that's something which works for everybody, that is totally fine. But if it's a situation where actually it's making you feel uncomfortable that the other parent is kind of coming back in, then I think it really is right to set out in an email, and I would do it in writing. And I'd say, look, you know, we're coming from a place where we want the children to have the most positive experience of spending time with each of us. I completely value your time with the children, and I wouldn't interfere in that. And I really hope that you can also value my time with the children and not interfere with that, and recognize that it's going to be confusing for the children if we are both in the home at the same time. And we need to each develop our own parenting styles with the children that's respectful to each other, but that's also independent of each other. And I mean, I guess from Nicole, from a co-parenting perspective, is there anything else you can say?
I'd say the same. I'd say from touching on what you said, Sam, about, you know, you have this opportunity to then kind of be who you want to be in terms of parenting, but also when you're not with the children, you know, when you go through a separation, you suddenly realize that however many years you've been with your ex-partner, that you kind of, you know, you've morphed into a certain person in that relationship. And when you separate, there's an opportunity there to kind of rediscover yourself and your own identity, and particularly if you've had children, because I think that's a huge identity shift that really kind of, you know, can really rock you in terms of suddenly, you know, you're not, your body's not your own and you're not your own, and you know, you have this other little person to take care of whose priorities come first. And so we kind of push our own needs and our own priorities way down the list, and sometimes we fall off the list entirely, let's be honest. And actually when you separate, you have this opportunity to kind of go, well, who am I and what do I want and what do I need and how do I meet those needs? And then when you are co-parenting, you actually have the opportunity, when you're not with the children, to spend time on yourself and, you know, enjoying the things that you enjoy, and kind of, you know, rebuilding yourself and your own life so that you can move on. I think my issue with nesting, and I do think it has its place, but my issue with nesting is the ability to move forward and to move on. And, you know, 3 and 4 people remarry or, you know, get into new relationships. And when you're nesting, I think you're sending mixed messages in terms of the children, because I think we all most children have this kind of wish in the back of their heads that, you know, well, if then, you know, they might get back together. But also I think there's this kind of, how do you then move on in terms of actually you having your life and your ex-partner having their life, and then getting to that point where you can then blend. And I think if you're nesting, you're kind of staying in a position where actually it's very difficult to move on with your own life and new people and get to that blended family outcome, which is really healthy for both of you and your children, because it sets, you know, coming back to your point earlier, Sam, about modeling. I think the most terrifying thing about being a parent, and probably even scarier when you're co-parenting or separating, is that your children are absorbing all of your behavior, and it is creating their subconscious conditioning of what it means to be in a relationship, what it means to be married, what it means to be a parent. And they will then spend their adult years looking for evidence that their subconscious programming is right. We all do it. It's how, you know, it's how we kind of, it creates the model that we have of the world. And if your parents have done that in a way where, you know, it hasn't necessarily been the healthiest relationship, and this is whether you're married or separated, because, you know, an unhappy marriage is just as damaging, or if not more damaging, than a divorce, if it's done in the right way. But actually, you know, modeling the behaviors of being able to kind of move on as a family, and you know, include other people into that family, that's a much healthier expectation of relationships for your children than if you kind of stay in this sort of halfway house for the sake of the children. But I'd argue if long term it is really for their benefit.
Oh, that was brilliant. It's as ever, these half hours go so quickly. I hope that was helpful. I mean, there's so much that we could say about co-parenting. The one point actually that I've realized from a legal perspective that I forgot to flag, and I should, is a new change which has come to the family procedure rules, which ties in with judges desperately wanting parents to settle cases out of court. But now judges have specific powers actually to order that one party pays the costs, the legal fees of the other party, if they have unreasonably refused to try to settle the case by going to non-court dispute resolution. And that sort of just underlines the fact that, you know, there is a real push here. So if you're in a situation where you've got a co-parent who's threatening litigation, do take some advice on that, because you've got quite a nice point to go back on and say, well, at your peril, because you might have to pay my fees. But thank you so much for listening, and I hope it was helpful. And I am doing the wrap up, which means flagging the next webinar that we've got, which is on the 18th of June. And it's all about if you're in a situation where you want to move with your child and your co-parent won't agree. So, you know, can your co-parent stop you moving? If you're worried that your co-parent will move, is there anything you can do to stop them? And does it make a difference if it's a UK-based move or if it's a move abroad? I hope that's helpful, and we really look forward to seeing you then, don't you, Nicole?
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining. I know you're watching on the replay as well. And obviously you can, the link will be up. Sam and I will share it on our social media profiles, as well as in the emails that come out after this. And you can book on for next time, and also ask any questions. You can send them ahead of time and we'll make sure that we get to them during the session. As Sam said, these go so quickly, so it's worth getting your questions in beforehand.
Great. Thank you both.
Oh, thank you, Tanya.